Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Sharby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support and the recent content. We recently did a collab with Martel from Miami Heat Zone Podcast. Please go check that out. Show him some love, and obviously us as well. We did a show on the Wizards that week, and we had a comment from nmores07 on TikTok, and he said, even though I'm a Celtics fan, I do root for the Wizards. Like, just be good, please. I think, the majority of Wizards fans would appreciate that comment, like myself. I know the Wizards and Celtics don't have the most amazing relationship in terms of, a rivalry and all that stuff. There's a little bit of bad blood at times. But regardless, I think the Wizards are definitely a team that you can root for because they've been so bad for so long. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that comment?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of interesting to see, a Celtics fan being pretty nice to the Wizards, right? Because
Yeah.
they've had a number of battles, when they had the stretch where the Wizards were a decent team. And, because we had like the Isaiah Thomas, John Wall
Yeah,
era, right?
that was
So,
the big one that I remember.
yeah, exactly. So just kind of interesting to see, some kindness from a Celtics fan, so,
Yeah.
for the Wizards. So, that's pretty cool. And again, like, the Wizards will have an opportunity over the next few years, to be able to kind of grow and grab new young talent and find ways to, rebuild because that's kind of the pathway for them right now, right? Since they're probably not really in line to get really any major free agents.
Yeah, once they find their guy, I think they'll be all right.
Yeah.
And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so now we, continue to go through our off-season reviews, right? And so now we've hit, the end of the Southeast Division and we're on the Orlando Magic, right? The Orlando Magic, they're kind of the hip hot new team in the Eastern Conference, to talk about, right? Other than, because obviously there's already teams that have been established like the Sixers, like the Celtics and the Knicks and others. But the Magic are kind of one that I don't want to necessarily say came out of nowhere, right? But they're a team that's kind of had an interesting pathway through the last few years, right? Because obviously they had a stretch where they were a playoff team for a little bit, right? Where you had like Vucevic, Aaron Gordon, and others, right? But now, they moved on from those guys, right? They got, assets back for some of them. And, now they've kind of hit gold, right? Because they were able to get Paolo Banchero in the draft, right? They also got Franz Wagner as well, right? Those are kind of the leaders of their, new group. They made the playoffs last year. We were pretty high on them going into last year, and I think they exceeded even our expectations. Obviously, going into the playoffs, that first round was probably, the most polarizing or divisive first round matchup, given the fact that a lot of people, everybody thought it would go 7, but people were very split on whether or not, Cleveland or Orlando was going to win that series. We were split on that series,
Yeah, I
right?
was going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember I picked Cleveland to win the series, and I felt okay about it because of the playoff experience. But there was a world where they could have lost, right? And again, that Game 7, we saw it. The Magic were running away with it in the first half, and
Yeah.
then the second half they just kind of fell apart, right? With
Yeah.
that lack of experience and everything. But the good news for them is because they're a young team, right? You feel like that they should be on an upward trajectory, right? Obviously, when you look at their offseason, most of it kind of entails, bringing a number of guys back. Obviously, you have one big, key addition, and that's, Contavious Caldwell-Pope, right? Who they were able to pry from the Denver Nuggets, right? And they gave him basically a 3-year, $60 million deal. Basically a little over $20 million a year. And this was kind of a signing where I think for us, we didn't really expect him to leave Denver. I know there were lots of reports about him possibly leaving, but we were still, I think, kind of in the mindset pre-new CBA where you just kind of just paid guys, that were key parts of your core in order to keep them. But for Orlando, they paid more, presumably, than Denver was willing to pay, right? And now he's leaving and joining this team. Obviously, with him, he's won multiple championships. He's got 2 of them. So obviously, I'm sure he would love to continue to win, but also, this is a offer that you can't refuse because of the money involved. And he's 31 already, so he'll be I think there's a player option in that 3rd year, which I'm sure he'll pick up. So this will basically take him through the age of 34, right? So almost half his 30s. So that's a big, key addition for them, right? Because of the fact that he's a guy that's been on multiple championship teams, right? We know that he's a very good 3-point shooter, right? Last year, he shot 40% from three. For his career, he's a 37%er, but by and large, the last 5 years, he's been at or around 40%, at or over 40%, right? That title year with the Lakers, 39%, and then 41% the following year, then 39, 42, and 41, right? I mean, in the playoffs, there's a drop off, right? The 2020 year, right? He shot 38%, which was good. But then the following year is at 21%. And I know he battled some injuries that second title defense year with the Lakers,
Hmm.
but he didn't shoot well. Then for Denver, the championship year, 38%. Then last year, 33%. He didn't have a good postseason last year, and maybe that plays a part into it as well. But thing about him is because he's a good defender, right? Even if his shot's not falling, he can still have a positive impact on the game. Obviously, he still can't necessarily ideally go like 0 for 10 or something like that, but just in general, that's a nice part of his game. And he's a guy that can work like in dribble handoffs, right? He can kind of run in transition, right? But sometimes it's a little bit of an adventure, right? But either way, it's a good pickup, right? Because you don't need him to do a ton except basically, hit threes, take good jump shots and, defend, the other team's, opposing guards. More so smaller guards. He's not quite as, ideal or adept with the bigger guards, but still, that's the cool thing about Orlando is they were one of the last season, and so they can handle most other teams' offensive personnel, right? Just because of the fact that that's kind of their identity. They're a big, physical, athletic team. Have been able to put some giant lineups together out there. Not always effective necessarily because of the offensive limitations, but again, they have some things to be able to kind of rely on that other teams don't necessarily have. And then when you look at, the rest of their free agency business, right, it was bringing back most of their other guys, right, like re-signing Mo Wagner, right, to a 2-year deal, right, 11 million a year. Obviously he's coming off a strong, Olympics run, right, with the German national team. And then they also re-sign, the better one, Franz Wagner, right? They re-sign him basically to a max extension, 5 years, over 200 million a year. It's a lot of money. And obviously he didn't have a great ending to his postseason last year, right? Very famously had a horrible game seven against the Cavs, but he's still only 23 years old, and you're really just mainly hoping that that 3-point shot can come over. And then, you know, looking at the rest of it, right? I mean, you re-signed Goga Batazde, right? Who's probably like your third string center or backup center, kind of depending on the matchup, depending on the night. Um, and then after that, they also drafted Tristan da Silva, right? They drafted him in the first round, and I doubt he sees a ton of minutes, right? He's a guy that I think we thought was a fine pick, right? He's a guy that's got a decent, versatile, skill set, on both ends of the floor. But it's just there's so much depth that they already have at that forward spot that I just feel like it's probably going to be a little bit difficult, for him to get minutes unless he kind of usurps maybe like a Jet Howard or somebody like that in the rotation, right? Brought back Gary Harris as well. It's another veteran, right? So that's a nice re-signing. They let Markel Fultz walk. They let Joe Ingles go. Nothing necessarily wrong with that because again, there was already a little bit of a logjam at those positions, anyways. So after that, then you're kind of looking at the growth from the main guys, right? You're hoping for Paolo Banchero to take another leap, and again, he had a really good season last year, right? He became an all-star. I think he was an injury replacement if I'm not mistaken, but it doesn't matter, right? He averaged 23, 7, and 5, 45 from the field, 34 from three. So, he started off the year strong from three and then kind of had a drop off, but it's still a better 3-point percentage than it was his rookie year when he was just under 30%. So, you're really looking for him to grow, on both ends of the floor, right? As a 3-point shooter, also as a defender as well. But the fact that he's got, a very good offensive skill set, he's athletic, he's physical, he's tough, and he knows how to score, and he's a smart player, right? Those are things that bode really well. Already talked about Franz Wagner improving that jump shot, right? I don't know what happened to it, but he shot 28% from three last year, so that's not good. So that needs to get back up to at least, I think, or for defenses to kind of go back to respecting it again. Starting five, right? I'm gonna assume KCP just kind of moves above Gary Harris, and then the rest of it remains the same, right? Jalen Suggs, Wagner, right, Paolo, and then Wendell Carter Jr., right? So I think that's probably your starting five. And then your second unit, like I said, probably either Wagner or Batazde, whichever one wins out. And then after that, you're probably going to need at least one of Anthony Black or Jet Howard to be consistent rotational guys. Especially because both of those guys were lottery guys, right? And you just lost Markel Fultz, so you pretty much have an opening for a backup point guard there. And then you lost Joe Ingles, so you have an opening for a backup, swing man. So I think those guys, ideally, they kind of step in and kind of form, you know, the remaining bits of the rotation. And then after that, you still have Gary Harris. And then you still have guys like Cole Anthony and Jonathan Isaac as well. So they have a lot of depth on this team. It's just, again, if they're going to be able to make the offensive upgrades, you need your stars to take a leap. And then you need at least a couple of your young rotational pieces to kind of, be factors in their second season. So if you can get that, then that's probably going to allow them to take that leap. But if they take a little bit of a step back, right, those young guys, or if they just don't really improve that much, then they'll probably be about where they were last year, but probably just a little bit better, maybe come playoff time. So, I mean, offseason wise, I feel like it's an A just because of the fact that you grabbed a good player that's a really good fit and you didn't really do too much. Like, from the perspective of you didn't really do anything to really, upset the makeup of the roster, right? In terms of taking away from your strengths. Instead, you just kind of added, a missing piece, right? Not that KCP is the guy that makes you go from, an eighth seed or, like a fifth seed or whatever to a title contender or championship team. But it's a guy that combined with the young players, right, that should be enough to make them at least like a very, very good team that could be a spoiler for one of the, better teams, right? Not that they're going to beat, Boston or New York or Philly necessarily in a 7-game series, but they could give them a real battle like they did with Cleveland, except those teams are better. And there could be a world where, hey, maybe something happens with Philly where, somebody's hurt or just doesn't have a good series, and then Paolo all of a sudden gives you like 30 a game in that series, and then maybe they pull off an upset. You just never know. Because with young teams, it's unpredictable, where sometimes they could take, it could be a scenario where it's kind of a, baby steps leaps forward, right? But then there's other times where it's like OKC, where you go from you didn't make the playoffs at all to all of a sudden you're the 1 seed and you're in the second round. Like you just sometimes you just never know. Sometimes it happens sooner than you think, and I think Paolo is one of those guys where he could make it happen sooner than you think. So I think that's where there are some reasons to be really high on this team. Again, they already have an elite defense. You just kind of have to hope that some of these other guys can kind of pick it up on the offensive end. And if that happens, then that's where you're probably going to have this is an elite team type of build here. But they get an A for me.
Yeah, I have to agree wholeheartedly. I think it's an A as well. I'm not going to say A plus because that's perfection.
Right.
And I think there are some things that they probably could have done in terms of maybe addressing more of a facilitating point guard, but nonetheless, you do have two wings and really positionless guys that can really do all those things that a point guard would. So, I think bringing in KCP is awesome. Like you said, he doesn't detract from anything. He doesn't demand a ton of shots or anything like that. He's a spot up, and we already know that his defense is, elite and up there. And, like I said in the short, 100% doubling down on your identity and just making it better. And like you said, not detracting. That's the main thing, because I think their priority should be Paolo's development and, giving him the keys to have a successful career, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters. And I think he's on that trajectory as well as Franz as well, because I think Franz is going to bounce back. And the big thing is, at the time, they were both on their rookie deals, so that gave them the cap space to do this, and that's what you need to do. I love what the management has done. You need to, when your stars are on their rookie deals, you need to maximize the amount of talent that you can put around them, so
Right.
that opens up your championship window. And then adding in a guy like Tristan da Silva, I think that helps a lot too, because, like you said, it's kind of insurance where, maybe he could be like another gap filler where maybe, he plays a little bit of wing or something like that, or he pushes somebody who maybe doesn't really need to be there anymore, like a Jet Howard or something like that, like you said. And I think this A is a little bit different for the other A's that we've given out in regards to, like, it's not flashy, but it gets the job done. And it's really such a simple move to the point where you can't really take anything away from what they did. And it's amazing because I think they have so many deep pieces like Jonathan Isaac, so many defensive studs, and that's the really cool thing. I think the only thing that you could probably say that people don't really like about this team is probably the point guard. Not Jalen. It's not Jalen Suggs himself. Jalen Suggs is a stud. I think we both like that guy a lot, but it's more so the fit because, like we talked about, he's not a facilitator. They don't have that facilitator at the point guard. Because maybe Paolo does turn into more of like, a true point forward or something like that. That would be intriguing because if he does that, I think that will be really what takes his game to the next level, like with the playmaking and stuff like that. Because we already know he could be a bully down low. We already know that he could shoot the ball as well. So I think it really comes down to the playmaking stuff. But overall, you can't hate on anything that this team has done. And I think, it begs the question, like, what tier are they in now? I don't think they're in that tier with, the Knicks and Celtics or anything like that, but they're right there. They're right on the cusp. And they're that young and up and coming team. And that's what happens when you have youth and proper management, really.
And that's the thing where, again, like sometimes these, as I kind of already mentioned, right, some of these things happen in stages. And for the Magic, right, as Paolo continues to grow into his own, right, that's how far they're going to go, right? Because again, like you said, if he gets to that point where all of a sudden he's, pretty much a do-it-all type of forward, right, where, like you said, not just a scorer, but also a guy that can, actually run your offense, then that's going to really help because then you don't have to invest as much in a facilitating, point guard, right? Like obviously, they're not the same player because they're not, in the same sphere of accomplishments, but say like a LeBron, right? Like he was a point, he's a point forward, right? So
Yes.
you don't necessarily have to have like a no, like a traditional point guard next to him, right? Like obviously,
That's his
there are
best
guys
player
that
comp. I agree with you.
right, like there are guys that have played next to him that are good passer playmakers, right? Like you have a D'Lo right now. Then obviously you have guys like Wade and Kyrie. Again, like you're not putting him next to like like a Steve Nash type
No, no,
player,
no,
right?
no,
Like
no.
you don't necessarily have to have that type of guy where it's like a pass first type of point guard, right? And those type of point guards aren't quite as common in the NBA anymore, right? It's more so combo guards. But like you said with the Jalen Suggs, right? That's another thing where like, what if all of a sudden his playmaking, kind of takes a
True.
leap forward, right? I don't know if that's gonna occur this year, but he already took some leaps forward in terms of his game, right? Because and the first part of it was the health issue, right? Because obviously his first two seasons, 48 games, then 53 games, but
Yeah.
last year he's at 75 games, right? 3-point shooting went from 21 as a rookie, 33 in his second year, just under 40 last season, right? So that's the part that's awesome, right? He was on all team defense, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and then at the same time, right, he became a 40% 3-point shooter, right?
Yeah.
So you got two guys in the backcourt that are essentially 3-and-D guards. And, Suggs has a little bit more, I guess, passing playmaking to him, although, his assists went down last season, right? Because he's
Hmm.
not really playing point guard that much anymore.
Yeah, that's my
So,
point. Like,
yeah,
because you look at
exactly.
what
So,
he does, like he creates more so off the spot up or bail out shots and things like that.
right.
But because he's not really initiating the offense. Like I said, it's more so between Franz, who's also a great passer as well, and Paolo. So if either one of those guys can get into that, you know, that tier where yeah, all right, that's fine. We can run through you 100%. The offense is geared around you. All right, cool. That puts them above the hump, I think, or over the
Yeah,
hump.
Paolo
Excuse me.
Yeah, Paolo shooting, playmaking, defense, and obviously, like for him, because he's the guy that projects the most to be the superstar. That's the guy that you expect can add the most to his game.
Hmm.
And then for Franz, he's got to get the 3-point shooting back. And then for Suggs, like you said, continue to improve and continue to stay a really good 3-point shooter and improve probably a little bit more as a playmaker as well.
Yeah.
Because defensively, he's already there.
Yeah.
So and that's the thing, right? Those are your three main guys essentially. So and like you said, the other part that's really good is the fact that you mentioned that they're already kind of trying to, help Paolo out and make things easier for him while he's still on his rookie deal, right? Because
Yeah.
again, you're not going out, and giving, like average, below average players, a ton of money like we used to see, like a few years ago.
Yeah.
Now you're bringing in, like you said, smart players and doing really good and smart high IQ signings,
Yeah.
right? That where these guys can really fit in, and it's a veteran, right? So I mean, you can't really go wrong with that, right? So like even though it's still a really young team, you do have a guy who knows what it takes, to be on a, to win a championship. So that's the cool part about it. I guess between Anthony Black and Jet Howard, right? Those guys, like Black, for his part, right, he was drafted what, sixth overall last season. And, early on didn't really play. And then you had the injuries to the guards like Markel Fultz. And then he ended up playing 69 games. Didn't really do enough, right, to be on the all rookie team or whatever. He shot
Hmm.
46 from the field,
Hmm.
39 from three, but just, few shot attempts, few, offensive opportunities. So, what are we looking for from, him and I guess also by extension Jet Howard, in their second seasons, right? Because it's probably for Black, right? Playmaking, facilitating, and, just more consistent offensive production. And then for Howard, pretty much everything, right? Like outside of the 3-point shooting, what I mean? That's
Yeah,
basically, that was the extent of his game, coming into his rookie year.
sure.
But, we saw him a little bit in the summer league, I guess, this time around. But it's but still you're kind of just wondering like what are you actually going to get from from these guys because again like both picks Anthony Black, right, that was regarded as a good pick for Orlando, right, but we still haven't seen much of him yet. And then for Howard, right, I don't think we really saw him at all for the
No.
most part.
With Anthony Black, I think it's a confidence thing. Like you said, it does come down to efficiency and playmaking and things like that. But you got to believe in yourself to be able to do those things. And from what I saw when I watched him play, it looked like he was deferring a little bit, if that makes sense. And that happens sometimes when you have the stars set in stone. And like we literally just talked about it. Paolo and Franz are the guys. Excuse me. So with Anthony Black, I think he just needs to have that confidence to be able to play alongside the starters, and I think he could be their starting point guard because the upside is there. He's got an amazing frame to be a point guard, and like you said,
Yeah.
if he can figure out the facilitation, a 6'7", 200-pound PG that can facilitate and shoot the ball, I think that I'm not going to say like elite, but a serviceable starting point guard for this team to put them over the hump as well as having KCP out there as well and like Jalen Suggs, like they have the guard room depth. It's just they all do very different things.
Yeah, exactly. And then like even like a Cole Anthony, right, where that's another guy that they've already, paid, and he's kind of, made a name for himself as sort of like an energy scorer,
Yeah.
off the bench, right? Whereas like most of the other guards are more, kind of like 3-and-D oriented, right? Like
Yes.
you don't
Yes.
really have. Yeah, exactly. whereas like Anthony's got, like the ball handling, wizardry skills, but he's more like a scoring guard,
Yes.
like an energy guy. So they have a
And
lot
he's
of different.
undersized too.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas, all the other guards are relatively big for their
Yeah.
positions. So that's and they're athletic. So and
Yeah.
although Anthony's a good athlete too, just like
Sure.
you said, a
Yeah.
little guys, but that's kind of the interesting thing where a lot of these guys seemingly, kind of fit into this identity where, like I said, they're trying to make a big, long, physical, athletic team,
Yeah.
right? And it's just, can you add a little bit more skill on top of that? Because, if you can get the big and skilled part down, right, then that's where you have, a really dangerous combo, right? Because obviously, we had the Warriors run where, they did have bigs at different points, right? But obviously their strength was more so, in their perimeter guys, right? With the
Yeah.
skill aspect, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously now, you had the last several years, right, where most of the teams that won the titles, had a decent amount of size, right? Like obviously like Raptors, Lakers, Bucks, Nuggets. I guess yeah, the Celtics. You got Porzingis at
I would say so.
7'3".
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown. Those are
right. Yeah, and White
relatively
and
bigger
Holiday.
guys.
Yeah, White and Holiday are bigger
Yeah.
guards. So yeah, so like just in general, we're trending more or going back to size being a lot more important. I think than it had been at one point. So I think the Magic, they're on the right track. It's just like you said, the question is, what tier are they in?
Right.
And again, like I said, I think that really depends on what you're going to get from Paolo because
Agreed.
if he can, yeah, because again, if he's, kind of like last year where he's borderline all-star, or, I guess if you take a little bit more of a leap, like an all-star, right? Well, then you'll be better, but it won't be, as big of a leap. But if he's all of a sudden like borderline all NBA, or something like that, where he's in the All NBA conversation, right? Then that's where you can probably talk about, oh, okay, that probably means that one of these teams is going to be a little bit disappointing because that happens every year, either due to injuries or whatever. And then they could probably take, that top 4 spot. Because again, like you look at the Eastern Conference, again, Philly, as long as Embiid is semi healthy, like around 60 games, they won't be a play in team. They'll be probably a top 5 seed, right? So, and then the Celtics will be there, the Knicks will be there, the Bucks will probably be there. So then that's probably where they could probably be better than Cleveland next year, right? Like I think
Oh
they
yeah,
were
yeah.
one, yeah, I think they had one less win on their record, right? The Cavs were 48-34, the Magic were 47-35, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they could probably be. I think they could be better than Cleveland. Compared to Indiana, it's a very different team, right? Because obviously Indiana is more offense, and then Orlando is more defense. So that's the only problem is that like if the offense still kind of struggles, then they're gonna have some stretches where it's gonna be kind of rough because you still have to find some ways to score. But either way, if we look at their, over under, right, and we've been doing this, for all of these teams. And again, like the thing is with these over unders is, as we've mentioned before, we don't bet, but, we kind of more so use it to kind of get some type of baseline, like understanding of, the league, right, in terms of like how, the bettors in Vegas and whatnot view these teams.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at season wins for the Orlando Magic, right? Their over unders at 47.5. So that's about where they were last year, right? So I guess, if you're going to take over, then that means you're going to make the case that they can win 50 games, basically. So do you think they can win 50 games?
Here's what I'm gonna say. No, but it's not a bad thing. It's kind of like what we were talking about with the Heat in the last episode, and it goes back to what I was saying, about Orlando and Indiana. I think they're going to be in the relatively the same spot, but it wouldn't surprise me if Indiana's a little bit better because they do have a little bit. I guess they have more pieces that are further along. I think Tyrese Halliburton and Siakam are a little bit further along in their careers and have a lot of, or a little bit more experience than Paolo and Franz, really, if you want me to be honest. I
Right.
think Orlando's the more well put together team, but it wouldn't surprise me if they hit a slump and that sets them back, like 5 or 6 games, and then we're kind of back to like 45, 47 games, which, like I said, isn't a bad thing because I think they can go far in the postseason, especially since they added KCP. But I'm gonna go under with that one if you want me to be honest.
Yeah, I feel like this is another one where, it's either slight over or slight under. And
Yeah.
I feel like probably like slight under is probably maybe a little bit more realistic because again, I think the Magic will be better, but I don't necessarily know if that translates to significantly more wins because like you said, it may not be a bad thing if they win a few more, if they don't win as many games as last year because again, Philly's probably going to take a few more games than they did, right? And then the Celtics, I mean, probably not more than 64, but they'll be somewhere around 60 wins or, like well above 50. And then, the rest of the East will probably be somewhere around 50 as well. So, because it's just like, I don't feel like, the rest of these teams are probably good enough to win like way over 50 games. Because then you're talking about like, I mean, I guess the thing is that if you look at the bottom of the East, some of those teams will be worse, and that might be an opportunity for them to pad, extra wins, right? So instead of like you play the Bulls 4 times and you split because the Bulls, were basically a little, just slightly under 500, you could go 4-0 or something like that against the Bulls, right?
Right.
The Atlanta Hawks, or not the Hawks, the Nets, right? Like maybe you went like 1-2, but then maybe now you're 2-1 or 3-0. And then the Wizards, maybe you were like, you know, 1-2 or something like that. Maybe you're 3-0 or 4-0 or something like that. Like, so you might be able to pick up and add a few wins here or there, but then it could possibly be canceled out by some of those other teams. But again, that's where it's important to make sure you get off to a fast start and not have like a weird, like you said, slump where like you have like a 2 week stretch where you just don't really win enough games because that's probably gonna sink your season. Because again, we talked about it in the West, but in the East, again, you look at the standings, most of these teams were within, a game or so of each other, right? After the Celtics, right, you had the Knicks at 49, or excuse me, at 50 wins, the Bucks at 49, Cleveland at 48, Orlando and Indiana and Philly all at 47, and then the Heat, who were the 8th seed, at 46. So, again, you look at now the good, when you look at the Eastern Conference, the Magic have according to Tankathons, right? They have the 26th hardest schedule. So that means in theory they have an easy schedule. Of course, that's always going to, kind of be rapidly changing because sometimes you might have what is projected to be an easy matchup, but then that team actually ends up being way better. So then it's a tough matchup, or you have a really tough matchup and then it's an easy matchup because of injuries or, whatever else. So that's a little bit hard to kind of figure out in the season. But again, the main important thing is that you can't have a bad stretch for like 2 weeks because if you do, that's going to basically be the difference between you being, like middle of the pack or playing or like middle of the pack and top four or something like that. Like that, that's what's going to happen. And with a young team, something like that is probably a little bit more likely. Although, you could also make the case that with a young team, they're going to have the energy where they're not going to run out of gas. But it's all dependent, like I said, really on, Paolo and then a couple of the other young guys, right? And mainly Paolo. Like I said, if he is basically like a top 15 to 20 player next season, then that'll be enough to probably get to, a top 4 seed. But like you said, it's possible like you could be a top 4 seed, but that might be like 46 games.
Yeah,
But I mean,
and yeah, because like if you look at it recently, like in the past few seasons, let's just say like 5 or 6, there's only been about 4 teams that have won 50 plus games. So not everybody up high can win, 50 plus games. So I feel like if the Magic are going to be sitting at like 5 or 6, then I don't think they win 50 games. But like you said, if you're in that 4th seed, there's a possibility. So that's kind of how I look at it. And like even to go back to Franz, I feel like he plays a huge factor into this because I feel like he could lift them
yeah,
out of a slump or put them in a slump.
he's a swing piece.
Exactly, and he's got to be consistent. And I feel like I know we just put a lot of pressure on Paolo and stuff like that, but I think Franz needs to hold his own weight as well because I think if he doesn't, then the ship goes down.
Yeah, yeah. Like I'm not really ready to sell stock on Franz at this
No, me
point.
neither.
I think he just had a bad game 7. It happens,
Yeah,
and I think last year was an aberration from the 3 point line, and I think you'll see him go back to what it was before, right?
yeah,
If it's like low 30s or under, all right, then I'm kind of worried, right? But if he's like at 35 or something like that, then I'm okay with that
yeah.
because
I'm
then
I'm cool with it.
like last year it was just a bad year shooting the three. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm hoping for.
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, again, like that's the thing with the Magic is that I feel like this is the team of the Eastern, conference teams that probably has maybe the most variance to it because there's a world where like everything clicks for the young guys and all of a sudden they go from, what they were last year to like you said like a 50, or more win team. But then there's also a world where maybe a couple of guys struggle a little bit with an increased opportunity or role and then it doesn't work out that well and then they're a little bit worse than last year. But like you said, going into the playoffs, they may have a better chance than they did last year just because they have more, now they have a little bit more experience under their belt. So,
Yeah.
but it could go either way. But I'm feeling like I'm leaning towards they're definitely going to be better. I just, again, how many more games better? I'm not sure. Like I said, it wouldn't shock me, like you said, if they lost a couple more games, but they're still like a top 4 or 5 seed.
Yeah.
Like that's how I think how you probably have to look at it. But again, I think that there is reason to be excited for the amount of upside they have because there's so many young guys that could all get better.
Yeah. Because
Whereas,
like you even have to fact in terms of the standing stuff. Like I don't see them being a top 4 seed because I think people are some people have forgotten, but Philly's going to be back with a little bit of vengeance. I think they're going to be a little bit healthier. So either Cleveland, Orlando, or Indiana's coming out of there. Which
yeah,
one is it going to
exactly.
be?
Right, because like say the Bucks, right? I know people are not as high on the Bucks anymore, even though I think people like what they did in the offseason. Like as long as Giannis is healthy, they still probably have a pretty high floor where it's unlikely that they're going to drop below like 3.
Yeah,
Unless he has to miss like 20 games or something like that.
exactly.
But yeah, and that's the problem. And then I think like with the Celtics, they're not falling off because they're not going anywhere,
No.
right? Maybe the Knicks win a few less games or something like that, but I
Sure.
mean they'll still be one of the top seeds or something
Top
like that.
three.
Yeah, exactly, because they have a lot of really good pieces too, right? They have an All NBA guy,
Yeah.
so that's the thing, right? Like the teams with the All NBA guys, is if they're healthy, those should be the top 4 seeds.
Yeah.
But if all of a sudden like Orlando gets an All NBA guy, right, then that's where they can slide in there. And I guess Cleveland, like Mitchell, probably would have been All NBA if he hadn't have missed so much time.
Yes.
It's just again like they've I feel like they're not that they're close to maxing out. It's just again like I feel like there's not as many pieces that you can really rely on to actually improve. Like I guess like with Cleveland, like Garland could have a better season, and I guess Mobley could have a big season. But with Orlando, there's like a number of guys where it's like again their best player can improve. Whereas like with Cleveland, their best player is kind of already he already is what he is, which is really good.
Yeah.
But that's where I feel like Orlando could possibly have more upside than a team like Cleveland, but it may be a little bit easier for the Cavs to win more regular season games.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, again, everybody, let us know your thoughts in the comments, on the Orlando Magic, because a lot of people have kind of been talking about them being like a sleeper, surprise team. I mean, Paolo himself, right, has kind of argued the fact that like we believe that we're good enough that we could be right there, with the rest of the top teams, in the Eastern Conference, which is a good mindset to have, right? Like
Yeah, I
obviously
love it.
you got to be able to prove it, but the fact that that he feels comfortable saying that, is a good thing,
Yeah, I love
especially
it.
because yeah, especially because again, you're going to have to think that anyways if you're going to want to be able to get further than you did last year, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure Orlando would like to improve upon a first round exit because I mean it was a 7 game series and they were right there. So, that's a good sign I think when your best player has a mindset like that. And I think,
Absolutely.
if the rest of the team follows, and kind of improves and goes along with him, especially now that you have, a veteran guy in KCP who's won, then, that to me that would be nowhere to go but up for that team.
If you're a Magic fan, you should be happy. Like that you should be really more than happy. I would say enthusiastic. You
Right.
should be jumping for
Yeah.
joy because this is amazing.
Yeah. I guess, maybe like one last thing,
Mm,
about the Magic. Where are we on their centers, for the most part? Like, how do we feel about that
mm.
center rotation, right? Where you have Wendell Carter Jr., Goga Batazde, and Mo Wagner, right? Like, do you feel like that, Carter Jr. is a part of that core, or is it like possible where it's like, of the guys in the starting group minus KCP, he could be like, hey, if we feel maybe okay moving on from you.
I would say none of them are safe, but all of them are serviceable. I think they all do get the job done. They're all very different. There's a lot of hustle in that center room, which I really like because I think a lot of center rooms are lacking that. There's a little
Yeah.
bit of durability, a little bit of chemistry as well. Obviously when you have, Franz and Mo Wagner being brothers, that's a whole nother level of chemistry. But even like a Wendell Carter Jr., I think he's awesome. I think what he can do, he can be a little bit versatile, shooting the three ball at times, being kind of like an athletic guy. And he's not, old. He's only 25. So I feel like the youth is there. Mo Wagner, 27, 6'11". I think with Wendell Carter Jr., he's a little, I'm not going to say like super duper undersized, but he's 6'10". But I think that's probably another area that there is room for improvement for, but I don't think it should be their priority because I think they do a good job managing the minutes and kind of rotating those guys in and out, and I don't think that was their downfall last year, and I don't think it will be.
Yeah. Yeah. Last season, 55 games. That's kind of a concern is the
Yeah,
durability factor with him, right? 55 games last year,
yeah,
57 before, 62. I think 52, right? Because he had that one year where he went between the Bulls and the
yeah,
Magic, right?
yeah,
In that trade. And then 43 and 44, right? And a couple of those seasons were shortened seasons, but still, like, he's never played more than 60 games once. So
yeah.
that's not ideal. But again, like you said, there's value in him on the team because of the fact that, he's a guy that is a good defensive player. He's a very good rebounder. And like you said, he can hit from the outside. And, like you said, he doesn't mind getting physical. He's a, big dude. Not that tall, but very, physical. And, again, he can shoot from the outside and space the floor, which is helpful, for a team that is not really a great outside shooting team, right? Like that's kind of,
Exactly.
one of the weaknesses offensively. So that's a spot where having all three of them, like you said, is nice because none of them are safe, but like you said, they're all solid, right? From the perspective of, okay, there's a world where maybe we do have to make a move, but we have two other centers. So we're not necessarily going to completely fall off from the center. And I'm not saying they're going to move him, but it's just his name has come up a handful of times, right, in some rumors and, in the last few months. So it's, I'm not saying he's going to get moved, but it is something just to keep an eye on, just because of the fact that, again, with these teams and the new CBA, it's going to be difficult to pay everybody, because, eventually you're going to have to pay Suggs, you're going to have to pay Paolo, right? If you want to keep those other young guys, you're going to have to pay them as well. The good news for Carter is that he's not making a ton of money, right? He's
Yeah.
actually, relatively, has a relatively reasonable contract for a starting center. This year, just under 12 million, and the next year, just under 11 million. So he's a free agent in the 2026-2027 season.
So he
So,
should be up for extension soon.
right. So, yeah, exactly. So it probably won't happen this season, but like maybe like next off season is
Yeah.
where you might start hearing that. Who knows, right? But either way, that's the cool part about it, is that like none of those bigs are being paid a lot of money. Like, I mean, they're all being paid about the same,
Yeah.
like somewhere around 10 million a year. So that, and they're all in similar ish tiers. Carter's obviously better than all of them, right? But they're all like decent centers where, like, if you're a team that needs a center, like, hey, like, you could do worse than any of those guys. So
100%. There is worse.
right, and exactly, and that's the thing where, like, if Orlando makes some type of move, one of those bigs are probably going to have to be in the deal because again, like, you just look at, you're not really trading any of the core starters, right? But the bigs, one of them you might be able to move, and then tie them together with somebody else, and then that could probably bring you somebody. But, again, it all kind of depends on how things go, because you don't necessarily have to rush it. But like you said, you have to be mindful of, ideally, you want to put together at least a decent team while these guys are under their rookie deals, because once those guys get paid, it becomes a lot harder to put those rosters together, but they're on the right track.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, let us know your thoughts, in the comments, about, even guys, even like Apollo, right? Just because of, like, again, we're very high on him. We think he's going to be, an all NBA guy, at some point, you know, maybe this season. But, um, again, you just kind of wonder, what you're going to expect from the rest of the team, just because of the fact that there's a lot of guys that I feel like not as many people know a ton about, right? And including, again, the young guys, like, they are very much unknowns, right? So, and again, sometimes there are times where, we saw it with Denver, right, where you lose veteran guys and you try to elevate the young guys, and it doesn't always work out, right? And
Yeah.
that's kind of
Agreed.
the tough part. Yeah, that's kind of the tough part in losing a couple veterans and kind of saying, like, we're gonna bring in, and develop the young guys. Not that you shouldn't develop young guys. It's just sometimes you have to take your time with them. So that's where I think, if things kind of go south, it's probably because some guys didn't necessarily progress as much as they wanted to. Maybe some guys had to take a step back. You just never know, right?
Yeah.
Like, progression isn't always linear. But I still have, very high expectations for this team. I think ceilings wise, what do you think? Like, not necessarily like regular season, but like, you think they can win a playoff series?
Yeah, I think they could win one, and
Right.
honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if they win two.
Yeah.
Um,
So
it all depends
ceiling.
on what Paolo looks like. I would say
Yeah.
an ideal world ceiling is probably Eastern Conference Finals. That might be a very hot take, but
Yeah. I think the ceiling is probably around that. Like, maybe like you go in, like, maybe you're going against, like, if you can get like the favorable path where you're not playing like Boston, in round two
yeah,
or something
yeah,
like that, then that's probably your path. Probably could be like, game 7 of the second round or something like that,
yeah,
or maybe Eastern Conference Finals, but probably not much higher than that, because I
no,
just feel like winning the East would be kind of a tall task, just because they haven't been there for as long and they're not quite as established as some of these other teams. But I think it would be a major disappointment if they went out in the first round again, because
yeah,
that would either be that they were a lower seed and they lost to, one of those top teams, or they just didn't improve enough and they lost to somebody that they probably shouldn't have lost to. Like,
yeah.
there's like, to me, it they need to be, I think, ideally, like a successful year for them is second round.
Sure, I
Like
agree.
like Cleveland last year, basically. Like
Yeah.
you go from, first round, you go from not making the playoffs, first round exit, second round, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're Orlando, I think that's a successful season for them. And again, we've talked about it with some of these teams. Successful year is different for each team, right? Because when we talked about the Wizards, right, a successful year for them is different than the successful year for Orlando, right? A successful year for, Miami is different from a successful year for Charlotte. So
Yeah.
that's that's something that you have to think about. But yeah, I mean, any other thoughts
Um,
on the Orlando Magic?
I mean, I think their depth is going to be one of their strongest feats outside of, their star talent and what those guys can do. Because I think, if they can kind of reach deep into their bag defensively, just like last year where they're a top defensive team, that's going to be their strength, defense and
Yeah,
depth, double D.
yeah, yeah. I guess to just kind of I guess one last thing. So like Tristan Da Silva,
Mm-hmm.
unlike maybe some other first round picks, he is a guy that was, he's 23. So he's not necessarily like a 19-year-old rookie. So, and I know we talked about he probably doesn't see like a ton of minutes, right? But, like what's a successful rookie season for him? Like I guess probably like if he can consistently get like 15 minutes a game or something like that, maybe a little more. Like what do you think?
Better than Jet Howard. I would say
Okay.
probably like 6 points.
Hmm.
I don't really see him being a facilitating guy, so I don't think he's gonna be averaging a ton of assists.
Right.
Same thing with the rebounds. I don't see him banging down low. Like I
Yeah.
said, I think scoring. I think I want 6 points on efficiency.
Yeah, I think the assist would probably be more so like in the flow of the offense. Like,
Sure,
you saw the open man and you just
you
swung
swung.
into the
Yeah,
open man. Not
relay guy.
necessarily like not that you're bringing up the ball and
No, no,
running
no, no.
off point forward. Yeah, like like if he can just show that like I can do a little bit of everything, then I think then he should be able to, earn his way into the rotation.
Yeah, if
Right?
he's more multifaceted than Jet Howard, he should be not starting.
Right.
Excuse me, but playing.
Yeah, and that could be a potential quote unquote battle, going into training camp and the season, right? Where it's
Sure.
like, oh wow, this 23-year-old guy, even though he's a rookie, he's coming in more well-rounded than a guy like a Jet Howard.
Yep.
And if he can shoot and he's got, some more positional size to him, then we maybe don't really need to play Jet Howard that much. But then it's like, he was a lottery pick. It's kind of hard to, not play a lottery pick again, the second season in a row.
Yeah.
So, for Jet Howard, I guess a successful season for him is actually getting minutes. And I
Yeah,
think
true.
yeah. So I think that's kind of the main thing there. I mean, his role on this team probably would mainly be as a shooter, right? It's just, can he do a little bit more than shoot? Can he, make the extra pass? Can he play a little bit of defense? Maybe get into passing lanes or maybe create second chance opportunities? I mean, like, I don't really see, opportunities for him to be like a featured piece on the roster, right? It's more so like kind of like just another, one of the other guys,
Yeah.
on this roster.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
facts.
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of news and rumors, there's not really, anything new that's kind of been, added, into the mix, because again, the NBA is at a pretty quiet point. I guess was one little thing that happened, right? Where, well, I don't know how little you might feel it is, but like say for the Phoenix Suns, they did open up a roster spot and created some cap flexibility because they did waive Nasir Little and EJ Liddell, right? They waived and stretched Nasir Little's 3 years, 22 or whatever it was, left on his deal. And, obviously Liddell wasn't really making a lot of money anyway. So it does, again, it adds a little bit more financial flexibility and it also opens up a roster spot, possibly for, maybe some buyout guy or something like that. So, what do you think about, what Phoenix did here?
I mean, it's interesting. I think in the report, they talk. Cause who did they draft? They drafted Ryan Dunn, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a defensive stud.
Yeah.
So I probably am expecting him to get significant minutes, which is a good thing.
And then also Oso Iguodaro.
Okay, yeah. I mean, like I said, with Ryan Dunn defensively, I think he can earn a decent chunk of minutes and, give yourself the flexibility because you've already cloosed yourself to the point where it's like, can this team really be successful if you can't add or you really get penalized for even trying to subtract too.
Yeah.
So I think kind of finding some loopholes and ways to improve around the system. I think it's a smart thing to do. So when I saw that, I was like, well, at least they're being active, in some regard.
Right. So like, I mean, and obviously we'll get to Phoenix when we get there.
Oh
Like,
boy.
does it still like does it change your mind about, Phoenix's off season, or like, or maybe not off season, but I guess like more so what you're expecting from the team?
Nope.
Okay.
I mean,
All right.
like there's some quality guys that haven't been signed yet, and you already talked about buyout guys that'll come pretty soon. But
Although they can't really get high paying guys
that's
that make a lot of money. Like it'd be like I'm a close to minimum contract or
yes,
low exception level guy, and
yes.
I'm getting bought out. Like you can't. They're not going to be able to sign like, oh, I'm made 20 million and I'm getting bought out, because
That's
that's
why it doesn't instill a lot of confidence in in
right.
in,
But
in
it, but
anything.
yeah. According to John Hollinger, $3.1 million cap charge in 2030, 2031. So that's the Nasir Little thing,
Mhm.
aka the Demetrius Jackson special. But the Suns will save roughly 40 million in tax penalties over the next 2 seasons, based on the current payroll. And for
W.
Nasir Little, that's rough because again, that guy was drafted by Portland, and played, I guess, well enough, right, to earn some type of extension. I was never that high on him, but I understood like why some people liked his skill set. He's an athletic forward that can do some things, but now he's a free agent, so I guess could he find his way onto another team's roster, or is it more so likely that he might be another one of these guys that either has to sit out this season, and just not get signed, or maybe he might be forced to kind of rehabilitate his career by taking like a minimum somewhere or something.
I mean, the market is rough, man. Like, if
Right.
you're not going for a minimum, then you probably aren't getting signed. Like, look at how long it took Tyus Jones to be signed.
Or
And
the
that,
minimum.
yeah, and that's a very, I think, high quality player in terms of what he can do offensively. So, it's rough, and there's so many other free agents that are still out there that haven't been signed. So, you know, to be positive, I think he will get a job, but I don't know if he's gonna be in the league next year. I don't know. Maybe when the season kind of gets going, but I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is just like, it's not really, it's like it's kind of hard to really predict, just because of the fact that sometimes there just has to be like a little bit of opportunity where it's like,
Yeah.
something happens to somebody, injuries or whatever, and then that just opens up another opportunity. The Pelicans, they did sign Javante Green, right? That was obviously, the forward guy that was on the Bulls, right? He's got a versatile game to him, right? He's a good athlete. He's undersized as a forward, but he is a guy that hustles, and can do a lot of different things. So he'll probably compete for minutes on that Pelicans team. So it's a solid signing. I still wish that they could find a big, on that roster. But either way, like, again, that's a guy that we've seen, play minutes. And I'm sure, like, at least regular season wise, he's a guy that, again, he's a guy that can help defend and, get you second chance opportunities. And, maybe we could see, minutes where like him and Zion are playing next to each other or something.
Yeah, I think the signing's okay. Like you said, though, the concern is going to be the center because as much hype as Eves Missy has, defensively, that's instilling a lot of confidence in a rookie. We've seen it in the past with maybe Derek Lively, but
Mhm.
not the same kind of situation. I think.
Yeah. Well, that is it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments about the Orlando Magic, right? What your expectations are. How far do you think they can go? How high are you on the different players on the roster? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, right? If you leave a comment, we will read it at the beginning of the video. Also, shout out to Martell for doing that collab with us on our episode about the Heat's offseason on this channel. And again, continue to like, comment, and subscribe, right? Help us grow the channel, right? We have blown past 100 subscribers, right? But, we want more. We're trying to get to 500, as our next goal. So hopefully, everyone can kind of help us get that. So continue to subscribe, click on the bell to get your notifications, and we will see you next episode.